This is a conservative audience, so many of us are gainfully employed, and many of you have jobs to get to after this breakfast, so I want to keep us on schedule this morning. I'd like to welcome you. This year in 2012, the Leadership Institute has already trained 4,674 students. And since 1979, we have now trained over 110,000 individuals. Before you have our schedule for the 2012 trainings. Please take a moment, take a look at that. That's the yellow page. And also for the most up-to-date list of the trainings and events here at the Leadership Institute, please do check our website. I would like to introduce this morning Alejandro Capote for our invocation and pledge. Alejandro is an intern in LI's grassroots department. He is a rising junior at Florida State University, where he's working in degrees in political science and international affairs. He's a native of Cuba, and he recently became a United States citizen. Alejandro?
Down here. Please rise as we bow our heads. Father, we thank Thee for the night and for the pleasant morning light, for rest and food and loving care, and all that makes the day so fair. Help us to do the things we should, to be to others kind and good, in all we do, in all we say, to grow more loving every day. In God's name we pray. Amen. Please remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. You may be seated.
Let me now ask Abby Alger, who is our Director of Digital Communications, to make a very brief announcement about the 90-day Voting is Not Enough project.
All right, it's adjusted. All right. This Monday, the Leadership Institute, I don't like microphones. This Monday, the Leadership Institute is announcing the Voting is Not Enough project and starting the launch. The Voting is Not Enough project is a 90-day special project that will run from Monday, August 6th, all the way up to Election Day 2012. The core of the project is, unsurprisingly, Leadership Institute trainings. In addition to the trainings that you see on the yellow page in front of you, the Institute is partnering with the Faith and Freedom Coalition to offer an additional set of Get Out the Vote workshops in key battleground states all across the country. The goal is to train more than 1,000 additional conservative activists at Get Out the Vote workshops that will teach them how to register voters and turn them out to the polls in 2012. The program will be supported by online programs. What we'll be offering online, in addition to the training on the ground, is twice weekly updates that provide short key tips on campaign and activism topics. We'll also be offering a weekly webinar with Leadership Institute faculty, which gives conservatives, regardless of where they are in the country and regardless if they can attend an LI training, an opportunity to interact with the people who teach for us and ask them the questions that they've been dying to get answers to. The combination of these two things will allow the Leadership Institute to arm conservatives to work for the candidates and causes of their choice in Election Day 2012 and hopefully make a significant victory so we can all celebrate the day after the election. Thank you.
Thank you, Abby. I'll next introduce Carla Bruno. Carla is going to introduce our speaker this morning. Carla is LI's Director of Foundation and Corporate Relations. Carla is a former English teacher and librarian and has published historical fiction piece titled Mischiefs and Miseries, a novel of Jamestown, 1607. Carla?
Good morning. Can you hear me? Is it working? All right. All right. Mallory Factor is president of Mallory Factor Incorporated, an independent merchant bank and financial relations consultancy that he founded in 1976. He's the founder and co-chair of the Monday Meeting, which is a nationally recognized gathering of elected officials, journalists, business leaders, and conservative authors in New York City, and a similar gathering called the Charleston Meeting held in Charleston. He is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations and has frequently testified in front of the U.S. House and Senate on terror financing, regulation of the financial service industries, and other economic issues. He is the senior editor of Money and Politics for TheStreet.com and has written widely for publications including The Wall Street Journal, Christian Science Monitor, Forbes magazine, and National Review. He's also seen as a Fox News contributor. In his new book, Shadowlands, Government Unions Control America and Rob Taxpayers Blind, Mallory Factor pulls back the curtain of secrecy to show us the power and the corruption of government union bosses who manipulate our political system for their own advantage and have their own covert plans for our nation. Interestingly enough, that today is the first day that Mr. Factor is allowed to speak about this topic. It's the first time in public. The book debuts August 21st, and as you can imagine, he'll be the target or the darling of the media, depending on how you want to look at it, once this comes out. So it's a great topic. I'm looking forward to hearing it. Oh, exactly. Yeah, no, can't be ignored. Mr. Factor has held adjunct professorships at New York University, and he currently holds the John C. West Chair as Professor of International Politics and American Government at the Citadel. He served as a member of the U.S. Air Force and as a senior fellow for the U.S. House of Representatives Republican Policy Committee. But wait, there's more. It goes on. He's also involved with New York and Broadway. He helps out with the Tony Awards every year. And he's originally from Bridgeport, Connecticut, now resides in Charleston, South Carolina with his wife Elizabeth and their, oh, there she is. Hi. And their 5 children. Are they here too? No? No? Oh, bummer. Anyway, please join me in welcoming Mr. Mallory Factor.
Well, good morning. You are a hardy bunch to be up so early. Can you hear me? I don't know if you all saw the results of the election last night in Texas. I think that's worth... AFSCME had an election a couple of days ago, which you didn't hear about. And let me tell you about that election. The head of the election called up the union leader who was running for re-election. He said, I got some good news for you, and I got some bad news for you. So he said, what's the bad news? He said, the bad news is your opponent just got 52%. He said, well, how could it be any good news? He said, you got 54. I probably don't need to talk anymore about the book. That tells you everything you need to know about unions in this country. Carla, thank you for that kind and wonderful introduction. I am just so thrilled to be at the Leadership Institute. This is a place that is important because we want conservatives to win, and this is a place that helps conservatives who want to win. In a few weeks, I will be debuting my book, Shadow Bosses. Government Unions Control America and Rob Taxpayers Blind. It's coming out on August 21st. I'm going to give you a preview today of a few of the themes and some of the findings in the book that I think will be of interest to you. You may ask, what is a shadow boss? And how does it have anything to do with government employee unions? In our own lives, shadow bosses are the people that we really work for, the people who hold us accountable for the decisions in our lives. It's our fathers telling us to study harder so we'll have a chance for a bright future. It's our mothers pressing us to stay out of trouble. It's our football coaches standing on the sidelines, sending in the plays. For many of us, God is our shadow boss, giving us a plan for action that we ought to take and the consequences if we don't. Well, in unions, unfortunately, while I was writing this book, we found that many of our political leaders have shadow bosses, and their shadow bosses are the government employee union leaders of this country. These bosses tell them what to do, which legislation to support, when to bend to the demands of the unions in contract negotiations. They actually demand that they do. And the shadow bosses are there to pat the politicians on the back when they do well and to tear them down if they don't follow through on their agenda. I'd like to share with you for a few moments why I wrote this book. I started working on this project with my wife about a year ago. For years, I've written and spoken about our growing national debt and investigated why our government is growing beyond its means. I've been sounding that alarm for years, as many of you here have. And I've spent a lot of time looking at the root causes of our excessive spending as well as the effects. What I discovered and what I kept coming back to is the people that are setting the agenda. Who are the people that are setting the agenda in Congress, in our state houses, in our city councils, even on our school boards? And it's really about the shadow bosses and government spending too much on government employees and using their money that they get from their dues to put the bad guys in power. And this brought me to the subject of shadow bosses and employee unions. I began exploring how government employee unions lobby our government to increase spending for government employees, which increases their dues income and gives them more money to spend on politics. Can you all hear me well enough? Am I talking? Okay, I'm going to pull this off of here and do this. What we're really talking about is a cycle of spending which benefits government employee unions, and not even the government employees. It's the shadow bosses, and this is what's driving our nation into debt. And this is what the book explores. In the course of my work, I came to realize how fundamentally different government employees unions are from the more familiar private sector unions. And I'm not advocating for private sector unions, but there is a very significant difference. And unbeknownst to many of you possibly, government employee unions have taken over the labor movement. To give you a sense of how government employee unions have eclipsed the private sector unions, I'd like to review just a couple of numbers with you real quick. Of the 125 million people working in America, only about 13% are represented by a union. In the private sector, unions are still on the endangered list and declining every year. Less than 7% of all business workers are union members. Sounds reasonable. The percentage of private sector workers in the labor unions have declined since the 1950s, both because unionized businesses have been failing and because workers in new businesses are smart enough to realize that they don't want to unionize because they're going to lose their jobs. Basically, private sector unions have been driving themselves out of business for 60 years. But of the 20.5 million people working for our government, 41% are represented by government employee unions. 41%. 1 in 3 federal workers, 35% of state government workers, and almost 47%, almost half, of local government workers are represented by a government employee union. In the more heavily unionized states, government employee unionization rates can be 60 to 70% or even higher. More than 2 in 3 public school teachers are unionized, about 2 in 3 police officers, and 1 in 2 correction officers are unionized. Today, government employee unions include many hybrid public sectors. Government employee unions like the steelworkers and Teamsters represent 37% of all government workers. These unions represent over 8.3 million government workers, federal government workers in Washington, state workers in our state capitals, municipal workers in our cities. Almost every type of government worker has been unionized, including postal carriers, federal border patrol agents, Treasury Department workers, public school teachers, university professors, graduate student teaching assistants at public universities, secretaries in City Hall, police, firefighters, prison guards, and that's just to name a few. My friends, government has become the growth area for unions, as opposed to the private sector, which is in decline. Let me just put some perspective on it. There, in our entire auto industry, we have 219,000 unionized auto workers. That's a lot of auto workers. The post office alone, just the post office, has 477,000, almost 2.5 times as many unionized workers as the entire auto industry. Shocking. Liberal politicians often suggest that unions are organizations that serve a important public function by defending the rights of workers and setting and acting for the public good. But what most people don't realize is these are just private organizations. Private organizations that are working for themselves and on behalf of the people that they represent. So I don't know if any of you have heard of Al Shanker. He's legendary. He was head of the American Federation of Teachers. He ran that organization from 1974 to 1997. And he's credited with saying, and this tells you everything you need to know about the government employee union movement. And he's credited with saying this, and I quote, "When school children start paying dues, that's when I'll start representing the interests of school children." Now, understand, this is the head of a teachers union. Now, it's hotly disputed whether he actually said those exact words, but the point hammers home quite clearly that the interest of the unions, first and foremost, is to maximize their own dues. Second, the interest of their members, and a far third, the interest of the public. So why do we subsidize these unions? I don't know if any of you realize how much we do subsidize them. And I'd like to give you one quick example of how we subsidize them. I don't know if you've ever heard of anything called release time or official time. Have any of you heard of that? Great. Most people don't have a clue. Do you realize that if you're a public employee, you can get time off to do union business by your contract? In other words, you're being paid by our government to do government work, yet you're doing union work instead. I mean, it's just mind-boggling. Now, the numbers have been hidden for a long time, but my wife over there was able to dig it out from the Office of Personnel Management on a federal level. And we've kind of figured out how much time is being spent annually by these government employee union members doing union work while getting paid to do government work. The amount of work annually that they get paid to do government work and do union work, are you ready for this? 23 million man-hours a year at a cost of over $1 billion, not including benefits. And the actual number is not even ours. It comes from the Office of Personnel Management on the federal level. It is shocking. We talk about trying to decrease deficits. We are taking these organizations and we are subsidizing them. Now, the organizations complain that they need this subsidy, but does anybody have any idea how much money just the teachers' unions take in annually? It is shocking. And in Shadow Bosses, our book, we kind of size it for the first time. The amount of money that the teachers' unions take in dues, we're not including the money they got from stimulus programs to do training. We're not including the money that they got from special assessments. We're not including the money that they make on their insurance programs, which they force various states and localities to use. Just their dues is $2 billion per year, just the teachers' unions. And, of course, they use this money for all sorts of bargaining purposes. You got to be kidding me. You know what they use it for. They use it for political purposes. It is shocking. And this is what we go into in the book. And for the first time, we reveal this stuff. And by the way, if any of you want to see some of the other information, because we keep coming up with more and more things, www.shadowbosses.com, and you can see things about what these organizations are doing to our country. By the way, the government did report on how many government employees spent their full time doing union work. But the last time they reported was 14 years ago, when the government was a fraction of our size. Government unions were not as powerful, and it was still 1,000 people. And they have not reported since, and they've not even tried to report since, because the unions don't want them to. I could go on and on and on. I'm just going to talk about one other issue, and I'll then take some questions, because I don't want to get the hook from all you guys. Oh, there's more. I didn't see it. You snuck in on me. I am just so honored to be here today, and I can't thank you for what you do for our country, Morton. You are truly a great American, and it's just such an honor for you to ask me to come here today. Thank you. But I didn't know you were that sneaky. Okay, one other little issue. Okay, we all know that it is illegal for unions to unionize our military, right? It's illegal. Wrong. Our military consists of 2.4 million people. I'm not talking about reservists. I'm not talking about contractors. I'm talking about full-time military employees. 1.4 million active duty, 700 and some odd thousand civilian. Today, 60% of the civilian force has been unionized. Over 60%, 450,000, making our military now 20% plus unionized. I mean, just shocking. Shocking, and nobody realizes it. Now, granted, it's civilian, but a number of these civilians, a large percentage, were active duty and come back and do the same job after they retire. So our military is dependent upon the civilian workforce, unlike it had been in prior decades. It is vital. They are now unionized. TSA, Homeland Security, unionized. Border Patrol agents, unionized. U.S. Customs and Immigration agents, unionized. FEMA agents, unionized. I've just given you two of the revelations in the book. We have just tons of them that for the first time are being brought to light. I can tell you the official time. I am told that a couple of the good guys in the United States Senate and in the House are going to be putting some legislation to stop it. It's written into the code. They will probably pass it in the House with not a lot of problem if some of our leaders in the House don't wimp out. It probably won't get passed in the Senate until a new Senate takes over. And unless we change the White House, it probably won't get passed. But it is absurd to allow these union bosses to be able to get subsidies of $1 billion a year from our government. It is just absurd, and yet we do it, and it's never even talked about. Again, a lot of other revelations. We figured out why Obamacare was pushed by the unions. A lot of people thought it was the Cadillac plan deferral, but when you think about it, by getting a deferral, why would you spend hundreds of millions of dollars pushing something? And we go into great detail. We interviewed about 500 some odd people, and we got to the bottom of it. I can tell you the name Craig Becker keeps showing up over and over again. I don't know if you know who Craig Becker is. He was some poor little government worker who graduated from Yale Law School, and real Ivy League type. He was the SEIU's general counsel, the NLRB's appointee, and he's figured out how to unionize millions and millions of more people. I'm going to just tell you two other things. The ultimate goal of the unions, the government employee unions, is to unionize anybody who gets any government money, and that means veterans, Social Security recipients, welfare moms, anybody who gets any money from the government, they want to be able to unionize. And this is the ultimate goal. Keep in mind, every million people that they can unionize That's $1 billion approximately in dues. So these bosses are living high on the hog. They're giving money to Occupy Wall Street. They're the true 1%. I can go on. And we have the numbers and the data. And the book reads like a crime novel. Please read it. If it becomes a major bestseller, I can tell you that our royalties and will probably earn us about $1.25 to $1.50 an hour for the work we put into it. So I hope that this book will change the conversation a little bit. I hope the book will do some good. I hope it'll make our country a better country, and I hope it'll really move things forward. I'd love to take your questions, and I'll try to do my best to answer them. Yes, sir.
In support of what you're saying, one of the statistics that I walk around with is that the average clerk working at Macy's, standing behind the counter providing retail services, makes $7.83 an hour. The average clerk who stands behind the counter at the post office providing retail services makes $23 an hour, 300% more, plus benefits. How do we correct that?
A couple of solutions we come up with are fairly simple solutions. Number one, nobody should be forced to have to pay a union dues to keep their job. Stop doing that. You take away a lot of their money. Second of all, I mean, do you realize that there's something called dues checkoff? Anybody know what that is? I mean, we are using our government to withhold money for the unions and send it in, just like withholding tax. I mean, I don't know since we started with the unions, why don't we do it for the cable TV companies and the telephone company and the electric company? I mean, might as well withhold from everybody. But it's just, we don't charge them for it. People just don't see the money go out. Let me put it this way. If I had my cable TV withheld every month and I didn't see where it was going, the money was going, chances are I would never downgrade my service. I would just I would let it just ride because people don't see it. However, once I have to pay that bill by a check, I pay a lot more attention to it. Whenever dues checkoff is stopped, it goes down dramatically. Whenever people have the right to work, it goes down dramatically. I'm going to just tell you one other quick thing. Everybody thinks there's 23 right-to-work states, with Indiana being the last one, right? That's true, but there's only 7 states where you're not forced into collective bargaining. And those states have twice, even though they're right-to-work states, if you lose your right to petition government, if you lose your right to sell your own labor freely, and I'm not going to talk about a certain amendment because my wife tells me I shouldn't get into slavery. She's shaking her head and saying, "Don't get into it." But if you lose those rights, you tend to join unions because you feel like you have to. Therefore, even right-to-work states that do not allow people to sell their own services freely, force them into collective bargaining, which 16 of the 23 right-to-work states do, have twice the unionization rates of the big 7 that don't do that. And the book goes into that in detail, and we go into statistics. Almost nobody talks about that. A long-winded answer to your question. Thank you, sir. Please.
In the early aughts, we had the Republicans in charge of everything.
Right.
And I'm assuming from what you've said, they accomplished nothing in this area. My
Correct.
question is, going forward, if we're successful this fall in taking the White House and the Senate, what level of confidence do you have that we can fix the issues you've brought up this morning?
I hate to answer the question very succinctly.
Don't use the word hope.
A very low level of confidence. I'm sorry. I was just at a luncheon where one of the leadership spoke about a week and a half ago, and he was asked, when are we going to move certain things forward? This is the leadership in the House. And he said, we don't want to rock the boat because there's an election coming up. Is that true, Mr. Blackwell? He's shaking his head yes. The only problem is as soon as this election's over, a few months later, there's another election coming up. Less than 2 years. You right? And that's the problem. That's the fundamental problem. Sorry, I can't give you a better answer. You and everybody here are really the answer to that problem. It's really electing conservatives and teaching people how to win, which is what this institution does. That's the key to changing our society and having the opportunities for our children and our grandchildren that we had. I'm sorry. Yes, ma'am.
I'm a nurse, and there are a lot of good nurses, and there's a lot of good union people in the union. And my question is, how do you get the truth to them? I recently went to a meeting. I'm not union, but I went to a union meeting, and I've also gone to continuing ed. And basically, they're rallies for Obamacare, rah-rah pep rallies for Obamacare that really manipulate the truth about what's happening. So then how do those nurses, how do those good union workers get the truth if the truth they're getting or the information they're getting is from the unions?
Great question. Well, first of all, you have to understand that becoming a union boss is kind of like being a dictator in a third world country. I mean, you never have to get reelected, and nobody knows how you even got there. And I mean, these people never, and you never get a chance to even vote on having a union again. So once they're there, and you're stuck. I'm sorry? Please, I mean, if you, but anyway, the point is, though, that unless we change some of the regulation on this, unless we stop forcing people into unions. Now, why are they having all these rallies? Because once Obamacare takes full effect, there will be 21 million healthcare workers. Right now, there's about 17 million, and about 1.5 million are unionized. The government employee unions see an opportunity to unionize up to 21 million people. Remember, a place like Canada was in the same situation before they had national health care. Today, 60% of their healthcare workers are unionized. They see multi-billions of dollars, and they spend multi-billions of dollars. I'll make one last point on this to explain how it works. For most of you don't know this, and we have copies of the ads that prove this. Have any of you volunteered for a campaign? I bet all of you have at some point. You go out, you put the yard signs in, you do your work, you make the phone calls, you knock on doors. That's not what happens in the union world. What happens is you get paid $50 for 3 hours of volunteering expenses. You get a T-shirt, you get free lunch, and in some cases, if it's close to Election Day, you even get a turkey. And what they're doing is they're using those billions of dollars, and they're taking in about $15 billion a year, all of them, and they're using those to do things like that. Now, they call it volunteering, and they fudge the numbers. I consider that an illegal practice, but nobody's stepping up to do it. And the gentleman who asked the question about the former time when we had House, Senate, and White House, there was a political consultant in the White House that kept whispering in the president's ear, remember, 40% of union households voted for you. And that's a fact. They did. But the fact is, it's not the union households that we're against. It's the union bosses that are really taking the system and really hurting us. Now, the other thing is that the politicians that they use to elect do not follow what the membership follows. For instance, Second Amendment rights. Almost all of them, all of the politicians that the unions give money to, huge sums of money, are anti-Second Amendment rights. Yet the membership across the board in all polls I've seen are over 60% for Second Amendment rights. But they have no way of knowing who their money is being given to and how it's being used. You have to get accountability at the lowest levels, and that's not happening, and they're not going to let it happen. Yes, sir. I'll come back to you now. I see that hand.
Yeah, Mallory. Jim Young, National Right to Work Foundation. You alluded to this in your prepared remarks. Could you address the efforts that are being made to unionize home health care workers, daycare providers? A lot of these are being done by executive fiat in some of the states.
Here, I'll give you the $10 for asking me the question. That's a great setup. I don't know if you all know what he's talking about. Okay, this is the big, dirty secret and we go into it in great detail in the book. And this is how you're going to unionize all these 21 million healthcare workers. You're a mom taking care of a son in your home in Illinois. You're getting because he's disabled. You're getting a $1,000 subsidy a month from the state. All of a sudden, Blagojevich and the SEIU General Counsel, Craig Becker, says, I got an idea. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to put together an Enron-style company, just a shell company. And instead of having the government pay these people, we're going to pay them through this Enron-style shell. And then we're going to say they all work for the shell even though they don't get any benefits. Then what we're going to do is we're either going to hold a union election or we're going to declare that they need the union, in Blagojevich's case. And all of a sudden, all these people are unionized, and they're getting money taken out of their paycheck out of their subsidy without them even knowing it. Oh, this is happening. It's already happened in 10 states. Connecticut being the last. And they're setting up pockets of people like that. It's highly profitable for the government employee unions. Highly profitable. The bosses love this because these are people in general that are not very sophisticated, don't have a lot of money to fight back, and can't figure out what's going on, and are scared stiff to complain because now they're getting $900 a month instead of $1,000, but they don't want to lose that. So that's what's going on, and that's the really dirty secret that nobody's paying a lot of attention to. And it is just absolutely, positively wrong. Yet our politicians don't want to stand up for it. That's where you have to ask guys who know a lot more about these guys than I do, like Morton over here. But I think with the election last night, or the primary last night, we're getting some better people in there that aren't going to be afraid to say what's right. But anyway, yes, ma'am, you had your hand up there, and I apologize for not calling on you earlier.
Thank you very much. Actually, I have a two-part question. First, in your book, do you make any mention or analogy to SEIU/Acorn?
We do talk about in Shadow Bosses.
Yeah. Okay. The second is with regards to all these government unions. Do you make any distinction between which one of these government unions might be actually a positive? And I specify the Border Patrol Union, because they're the one union that is actually pushing back on the Department of Homeland Security, exposing the fact that we do not have true border security. And these men in those green uniforms down there on the line are truly at risk. And it's only through their union and their union bosses that they're able to challenge this administration's lack of true border security. Thank you.
You make a good point, but they're not doing it because they care about the Border Patrol agents. They're doing it to get more union members and more dues. I can tell you that. Their first and foremost goal is they're increasing their membership and increasing the dues. But as a byproduct, sometimes good things happen. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Tell me when I need to have the hook. I mean, I don't want to keep you all, but I'm enjoying talking to you so much.
Across the river, we had a mayor who really challenged a lot of the public, school teachers unions in order to try to reform some of the schools in the district. Now, he comes from the other side of the aisle, rooted deeply in left-wing ideology, but yet he was willing to make that stand. In some of the research you've done for your book, do you see that there might be some pockets of that with, on the other side of the aisle?
In a number of states already. These politicians, New York State, Cuomo, he recognizes that with what's going on, he may not be able to be reelected unless he gets some of this under control. Remember, this is only a small percentage of the people. The problem is that these government employee unions have so much money. I mean, these unions have $15 billion a year that we could find, and some people say it's 20. And that is just, I mean, that makes them Fortune 500 top third in terms of their revenues. We're talking about huge amount of resources. Just something like the NEA, if you compare, or the teachers union, if you compare it to all of our organizations like the Chamber and, I mean, the big organizations that they complain about, not even close to the amount of resources in terms of dollars. And they use it against these guys, and that's why they're fairly fearful. But some of them are standing up to them in small ways because of the potential of being just tossed out when their cities and states start to break down, as they are. Yes, sir. I'll take you next. I'll move over this
Certainly,
side.
thank you for your comments today. Can you talk about the success that Governor Walker is having in Wisconsin in regards to unions?
Yes, but you have to contrast it with what Kasich had in Ohio. I mean, he got totally beaten up. You have to understand, Walker did not press the whole issue. Most people, you all know that, right? He excluded firemen, right? Police. I mean, he didn't press the whole issue. He's taking it incrementally, and the results have been positive. Let me tell you this right now. That is not the war. That is a battle. This is not over. You ain't seen nothing yet. They've already said that into this next election, just on the presidential basis, these unions are going to pour in over $400 million. I think it's going to be closer to $1 billion. I mean, this is a real battleground. This is the union bosses, the guys who make $850,000, $1 million bucks a year, private planes, trying to keep their feudal kingdoms. Scott Walker's great. I'm not knocking Scott Walker at all. I mean, I am just so proud of what he's been able to do, and I'm proud of Becky Clayfish, who is his lieutenant governor, and I'm proud of what happened. But he has a long way to go still to change some of this stuff. Oh, I'm sorry. I have one here, and then I'll go right over there. Yes. Yes, ma'am.
Lola Ranch. I own and manage rental apartment communities. So, regarding the healthcare people, the people that are helping someone disabled in their home, in 10 states, they want to, or they maybe already are unionized, maybe you said. Okay. Why doesn't the state legislatures get together with the governor, if they are conservatives, and hopefully change this? That's the first thing. And the second thing, I didn't understand what you said 15 minutes back on the right-to-work states that where unions are going on inside of those. Could you explain that a little bit more, like Virginia?
This is a little esoteric. There are 23 right-to-work states. In the 23 right-to-work states, 16 do not allow people to get out of collective bargaining. In other words, a union gets appointed, or a union gets elected 40 years ago. You go into that job. You don't have to pay the union dues because you're in a right-to-work state. But they represent you even though you don't pay them dues. Exclusively. With grievances with your employer, they represent you in terms of what you're going to get paid. They represent you in all sorts of ways. And you have no way of opting out of that. Yeah, we should give people certain freedoms and rights, but that has not been very high up. I love National Right to Work. I think it's one of the great organizations, and we have somebody here from it. But that's not that's not an issue that they've been pushing either. They're trying to push the basic issue, which is right to work or not right to work. Well, it's not a nothing. You have twice the number of union members in the on a per capita basis in those states than you do in the other 7 states. In other words, if somebody's representing you and you have no right to represent yourself, there's a higher probability you're going to want to pay them something to get represented where you want to, because you're going to feel they may not do the best job for you, and they don't if you don't pay them. Yes, sir.
You mentioned earlier about the post office, the 477,000 workers, and today there's I think about a $5 billion debt due to their former workers through pensions. You know, how do they reform that? How do they get out? I mean, the post office is doing good work. They deliver the mail every day. I'm in that business. Nonprofits, both sides of the aisle, use it and need it and rely upon it. But how do they get out of this? How do they get out of this crisis and avert this? What are your thoughts?
Well, thoughts are pretty simple. I mean, there is more feather bedding. They won't allow. You don't need that many people to deliver the mail 6 days a week. It's just that simple. You can bring up productivity substantially, very easily, but you can't do it with the union rules. There are tons of postal workers doing nothing because they can't move them around. They can't shift them around because of union rules and regulations. The unions are what's killing the post office. And we go into great detail in Shadow Bosses, so you may want to pick that up and read that, because that's one of the things we go into in great detail. There's another question there. Yes, sir.
Mallory, my name is Jim Martin. I run a group called the 60 Plus Association.
We love you, Jim. You know, I know.
But before getting into that business, about 35 years ago, with the help of Reed Larson and the fellow sitting there, Morton Blackwell, we started a group called Americans Against Union Control of Government. We want to thank you for your book. We laud it, of course. This has been an age-long battle, and I think it was Jack Kennedy that signed the executive order allowing
That's correct.
the full unionization of government employees. So we thank you for your work. Thank you.
I thank you for what you do, and I just want to make one little point. The National Education Association, not that long ago, during my lifetime, was a organization very similar to AARP, and now it's the largest union in the country. History will repeat itself, I guarantee you. Thank you. Thank you very much. I got the hook.
Stay up here for a second, Mallory. First, I have to apologize for I have to apologize for my late arrival today. My wife drove down last night to spend the night with our grandkids in Culpeper, and I overslept. So I apologize, but I did get here in time to hear Mallory's talk. It was excellent, as I knew it would be. Some of us have been spending decades building a conservative movement, and Mallory Factor is one of them. And in the biographical material about him, you can see that he organizes a magnificently successful gathering of conservatives in New York regularly, and it is an oasis for conservative-minded people. In appreciation, let me give you one of our Leadership Institute Abner Smith ties. You'll see a number of people around here, including me, and there, wearing them, and it's the club tie of the Reagan White House and of the conservative movement. Thank you so much, Mallory. I invite you to join us on Wednesday, September 5th for our next Wednesday Wake Up Club breakfast. Don't wait for me to arrive at that breakfast either, because it happens that I'm going to be in Prague in the Czech Republic that day. But it's worth coming, or maybe even because I'm not going to be here. But our guest speaker will be former Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld. It's going to be a great presentation. And I invite anyone interested in a tour of the Leadership Institute and our building next door to meet with Heather Sherlock. Heather, where are you? Step on up here to the lectern. She will be happy to lead those of you who are interested, and you'll get a good tour of the Leadership Institute immediately after the breakfast. Thank you all for coming. Oh, of course.
Shadow Bosses is available from Kindle to Amazon to Barnes & Noble. Pre-order it, but more important, please read it, but after you're done reading it or buy a second one, send it to a state legislator and tell them to do something.
Thank you. From what I can see and hear about it, it's an important book, and you'll find much that is useful in it. Thank you all. Here's Heather for if you want the tour.